Story 1. When I caught myself going from extremely loopy, goofy, and jovial with a constant flow of mental sharpness and energy for anywhere between a day and a week to incredibly lethargic, heavy, hopeless, and irritable with no desire to even get out of bed or eat for the same amount of time back and forth, I only just recently realized that I've been doing that for the past 12 years. Story 2. When I realized that what I thought was nervousness and shyness was crippling my ability to function as a person, I couldn't bring myself to go to class, struggled to maintain relationships, and was barely eating. I had dealt with this shyness and nervousness my whole life without realizing it was terrible anxiety. And for my current biggest issue, constantly searching for symptoms of horrible diseases and convincing myself I have them. I need to go back to therapy. Story 3. When I couldn't stop thinking about work, I'd be hanging out with friends, and the second there was a lull in conversation or any break in focus from what was going on, my brain would start thinking about work and worrying about certain projects. I started having a hard time getting to sleep. Then I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. Constant pit in your stomach feeling. I couldn't even enjoy my weekends. So I have anxiety issues, and a particularly stressful period at work really triggered it. I went to the doctor and got on some selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications. They help. He also suggested regular exercise and just talking to people about it. I'm doing better now. Story 4. Over the course of my career in the military, I learned that I just push my anxiety down or make it less significant than it is because I believe it is what I am supposed to do at least. Story 5. When I would wake up to calls from my friends in the middle of the night to hang out, and then go back home and go to school without any sleep, I still wouldn't feel tired or the need to take a nap after I got back. I went out every day for 3 to 4 months. No naps during the day either. Story 6. This is actually something I am coming to realize currently because I have started to realize the mental and emotional abuse I was put through growing up. Story 7. When I realized that I wasn't like the rest of the people I was hanging out with, I worried way more than other people. I would get stuck in repetitive, intrusive thoughts or behaviors that I couldn't stop and had feelings of contamination. Story 8. The first time I noticed something was different was when I was about 10. I started getting really bothered when my mom was driving and didn't hit the same number of potholes with her right tires as she did with her left tires. I'm sure there were other things, but I remember this bothering me the most, and I didn't know why. Then one day at recess, I got something on my hands, so I wiped my palms on my jeans. I was in 5th grade, don't judge. I wiped the backs of my hands too. A girl asked me why I wiped both sides of my hands, even though there was nothing on the backs of my hands, and I remember saying, I don't know, I just want both sides to feel the same. Years later, I finally got diagnosed with symmetry obsessive-compulsive disorder, and it all made sense. Edit. I didn't realize what subreddit I was in when I posted this, but I'm a girl. Oops. Story 9. I guess when I stopped thinking it was shameful to have mental issues, I pretty much immediately realized that I clearly had them. I had avoided seeing it before that out of motivated reasoning, I think. Story 10. When I was standing at the Department of Motor Vehicles to get my motorcycle license after hitting rock bottom, losing everything after working so hard to get everything I wanted, I saw everyone in line in front of me laughing, smiling, and enjoying life. My mind went berserk, and I was standing there holding back an urge to do something bad. I wanted to seriously hurt everyone there. After a minute, I snapped out of it and thought, whoa, that was not normal. That was almost a year ago, and I am in a somewhat better place in my life. Story 11. When I packed a bag and gathered all the cash I could, I waited for everyone to go to sleep. I planned on leaving and never coming back. I knew being around the people who loved me would mean I'd always be me, but if I could go somewhere else, I could forget myself. I knew I wouldn't come back if I did leave, and I had no plan to start over. I remember thinking, I'd buy very little food and sleep in my car. I didn't want to actively harm myself, but I think I was happy knowing I'd eventually waste away. I was lucky that my mother noticed my light on and came to ask if I was okay. Something she wouldn't usually do due to my terrible insomnia. The light being on wasn't unusual, but I'd had a terrible week, a soul-crushing week, and she knew I was suffering. Obviously, I didn't leave, but I was able to finally tell my family everything, and I got the help I needed. I'm getting the help I need from professionals and family. If I'm honest, I think I wanted someone to come ask if I was okay. And this was my way of screaming for help because I didn't know how to say what I needed to say. Story 12. I knew I had some issues pretty early on, but I didn't realize how huge the impact was on my behavior. I was at a party and a guy high on methamphetamine put a gun to my head. Looking down the barrel, I didn't feel much of anything. Afterwards, I didn't really care. I wasn't in shock. It just didn't bother me. Other people's reactions to the situation made me realize how abnormal it was to be that emotionally blunted. I just thought, oh wow, it's worse than I thought. Story 13. When, at an early age, like in my early teens, I realized that I didn't naturally gravitate towards people the way everyone else did. I actually did the opposite and stayed away from and repelled people. Also, being in college and being unable to study even if I sat with material in front of me for hours. I just didn't care about the consequences of not studying and would just daydream. Story 14. I blamed outside factors for my unhappiness. I don't have friends, I don't have a girlfriend, I don't have hobbies. I assumed once those factors were solved, I'd magically be happy. Then I got really involved in theater, I made a ton of friends, and I started dating this girl who I was really into. I was miserable, and the misery seeped into everything else. Story 15. I threatened to kill my father when I was 14, and I thought having suicidal thoughts since 11 was a normal part of life. Not to mention I was nearly an alcoholic at 17. Story 16. About the time I dropped 15 pounds my freshman year of college. College was rough for me being away from home, my friends. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, I fell apart. It was a bad time. Story 17. Feeling disconnected from everything, like not being in my body most of the time. It was like that moment when you wake up but are not really awake, just that feeling the whole day. Even things that should make you feel better, like sex, feel like some tiresome movement. I could not make my head shut up about awful things. Doing anything required an enormous amount of effort, even things that I liked. I feel leaps and bounds better. Focusing on anything for more than a minute is hard. Some things throw me off and make me feel like everything is bad again. I need more professional help, but COVID-19 and all that. I was isolated before, so being in my home now doesn't feel much different. Story 18. Woke up one morning and did nothing but cry and feel terror for 2 hours. Missing important scheduled events. This had never happened to me. Nothing even close. Story 19. I felt absolutely zero motivation to do anything. Even getting out of bed in the morning was a chore. I felt overwhelmed by the simplest tasks. I didn't know it was depression because I thought it was just when you were sad. Story 20. My ex, who was current at the time, was in a long-distance relationship in another country and wasn't that interested in me, and I just couldn't handle it. He wouldn't return my text messages, and I would become very upset. I would see him online and try to call him repeatedly. Normally, mentally well people are sad when a relationship is ending, cry, and then move on. But I could not cope with being ghosted when I wanted answers. He was 5,000 miles away, and the more I pushed, the less I got because I appeared unstable. Classic borderline personality disorder. I'm better now with treatment. Story 21. When I would be so nervous before a presentation that I would start physically shaking as a product of my probable social anxiety. Or when I would get intrusive, probably obsessive-compulsive disorder-fueled thoughts after coming across a certain trigger. I'm still convinced there's a light at the end of the tunnel because I'm only 19. Story 22. Towards the end of a long-term relationship, I realized that I had been an emotionally abusive person to a wonderful woman for nearly 6 years in ways that mimicked one of my own parents' abusive tendencies. Not long after this realization, we broke up. It took me almost 5 more years to seek help for depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and addiction. Story 23. Something happened that caused intense emotions in my life. I was told to see a therapist. While talking, he gave me a book about post-traumatic stress disorder. Reading that, it all just clicked together. Story 24. I'm terrible at focusing on anything unless it's something I really like. Then I learn every single detail about it in 10 minutes. I have a lot of spare time to waste and enjoy, but I am not able to enjoy it because I'm constantly worrying, thinking that I'm wasting precious time. Constantly, In the back of my mind, I can't fight off that feeling. It also makes my hands shake and my stomach ache a lot. Story 25. My stomach would be in knots, and it became so painful I went to a doctor to get it all checked out. I did all the ultrasounds and such, and it turned out to be anxiety. At times it felt like I was going to soil myself, and at others like my appendix was exploding. It was such a physical symptom I didn't associate it with a mental issue. Story 26. When I realized I was instinctively talking louder than most people in a room, especially since I am normally a quiet, introverted dude. I met another guy like this, and it was super annoying, and it made me realize my own habits. Story 27. I actually didn't notice until a relative pointed it out. He observed me for a while and said, "I think you might be suffering from depression. It kind of shows." I just laughed it off, saying, "No, that's how I am all the time." I went from being neat to looking scruffy. I wore unclean clothes that had a slight scent. My nails on both hands and feet were long, and I wore slippers often. I got huge. My face and hair were unkempt, with dry skin. I had a distinct smell, barely showered, and more. I was just comfortable and didn't think much about it until he mentioned it. I even left dishes around my room, not a pile, like 1 or 2 cups and plates. When I noticed it one morning, I flew off the bed, disgusted, with the cover still wrapped, and went straight to the kitchen to wash dishes and had a mental breakdown in the shower afterward. I was disgusted with myself for slipping this far and not being aware of it one bit, but I'm working on it in baby steps. Depression is one hell of a drug. Story 28. I had always felt angry and never satisfied with any of my accomplishments. I was also hypercritical of my appearance when it came to food and exercise ratio. He told me very calmly that the women in his family have a history of mental illnesses, mainly depression and anxiety. He instantly recognized it in me, and the way he worded and the way his tone was when he told me I should probably talk to a doctor about my mental health just clicked in my brain. I, for once, wasn't angry and wasn't feeling like my world was caving in for no apparent reason. It was a moment of clarity. I made an appointment with my doctor that same day and thanked my lucky stars for the wonderful man in my life that put me on the right track to getting the help I needed. Story 29. Literally with social media, all those memes of depression be like, or anxiety be like, made me realize my thoughts and feelings were not normal. I don't have the more classic symptoms of the two, like random panic attacks or suicidal thoughts, but every single one of the lesser symptoms. So thank you to all those shared memes and awareness posts, because they worked. Story 30. When I held a pair of scissors to my friend's throat when he was making fun of me with our roommates, I was laughing about it. They were not. It turns out I have borderline personality disorder. Story 31. When I already had a high-paying job, security, my own apartment, car, and money in the bank at 25, I was still so anxious all the time that I could barely function. Story 32. I would come home from my job as a paramedic and just be completely checked out for days on end. Literally, I would sit down, dissociate, and stare straight ahead for hours, thinking of nothing at all, responding to any conversation with short, vague answers. After a good long while of this, my wife got pretty distraught about it, and I literally thought it was her who had the problem. I mean, I can't just talk all the time. What is there to talk about? Me, after saying 3 things and then recycling those 3 things twice that day, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt that it was a problem on my end, and we tried having me talk about my workdays on my way home as a form of decompressing. It didn't really help much, and the turning point came when I told her about a call that I was dispatched to where a vehicle had been struck, caught fire, and the caller could hear somebody screaming inside the vehicle. They did burn to death before anyone could get there. She basically said, "No, I can't handle this, and I don't think you can either. You need to see somebody." So, once again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and saw a psychiatrist. I got my post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis at the end of session 1. It was a pretty slam dunk case, apparently. The psychiatrist explained how my particular manifestation of post-traumatic stress worked and worked with me to find non-pharmaceutical controls that worked for me, such as meditation. Turns out, I deal with stress by dissociating, and my post-traumatic stress is simply my stress mechanism run amok. I'd been having flashbacks without realizing it, and then automatically dissociating in response to the flashbacks. I know that sounds weird, but flashbacks aren't how Hollywood shows them, at least not for me. For me, it's more like minding my business when suddenly, for whatever reason, my brain says, "Hey, remember the police officers running that dead baby out to you? Remember the look on the officer's face when you called it because the baby had been dead too long? Let's think about that." What we eventually figured out was that painting along with Bob Ross provided an effective treatment strategy. It allowed me to develop focus and put the brakes on the dissociation without completely crippling my stress management skills the way certain forms of meditation did. It's bizarre, but I absolutely swear by it.